Hello and welcome to this special CNBC Africa panel coming to you on the sidelines of the Africa CEO Forum here in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. We'll be looking at the Mauritius' impact on the continent in terms of investment, and I have quite a lovely panel here to explore that topic. Talking about Mauritius, this is a country that is about 1.2 million people, but punching above its weight in terms of investment on the continent. And to put this in perspective, my guests today are Mr. Sachin Mohabir, is the Acting Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Economic Development Board of Mauritius. And also we have Michel Pilot, is the Chief Operating Officer for IBL East Africa Investment. And before we get into the conversation, let me just allow the guests to first introduce themselves properly in terms of what they do and also what they think about this topic. Let me start with Michel.
Thanks for the introduction and for having us on this panel. It's a real pleasure to be here. So Michel Pilot, CEO of IBL East Africa Investment. So I'm working for the larger IBL group, which is a Mauritian conglomerate and has embarked on a strategy to establish a significant presence with a focus in East Africa since 2018, and we managed to close a few successful investment recently and establish a strong presence there. And obviously that topic is really relevant for us because obviously being a Mauritian entity, being a Mauritian conglomerate, and trying to understand how do we position ourselves as strategic investors in East Africa and the impact that we can bring with our investment and obviously trying to make sure that we also understand those markets correctly and make sure that we position ourselves successfully and sustainably over the long term.
All right, thank you so much for that, Michel. And my other guest today is Mr. Sachin Mohabir, is the Acting Deputy Chief Executive Officer for the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. Sachin, please talk to us about what you think about this topic that we're looking at, and also give a better introduction of yourself.
Thank you for inviting us in this panel. First of all, the Economic Development Board, who we are. The Economic Development Board is a government agency. We operate in the Ministry of Finance Economic Development. Our main job is mainly to attract investment, to facilitate foreign investors' implementation in Mauritius. Our job is also policy advocacy, how to make the island of Mauritius more attractive to foreign investors, to local investors, and also it's about export promotion, how we make it and create opportunities for the local players to export in the region and globally, using the different trade agreements that we have. And another job that we have is to market Mauritius abroad. So this topic today will help us in all of those functions and how we can better brand Mauritius and increase the profile of Mauritius.
Quite interesting and well put there. Let me get Mr. Pilot's assessment here, because I'd like to hear from the private sector in terms of the challenges we've seen over the years. COVID came, had this devastating impact, but we're seeing the countries are building better. But I'd like you to speak to that impact of COVID on the work that you do and also on the country Mauritius.
Yep. Maybe I'll start with speaking about, I'll let Sachin maybe talk about Mauritius as a destination and as a country and how the country has evolved. But I'll start with IBL, and I guess it's going to also give a bit of a picture of what has happened in Mauritius. So yeah, clearly, it was a major disruption. We've got investment, for example, in sectors like hospitality, which were obviously completely shut down around that period. And then what we have seen also is major disruption in supply chain. And I think we are slowly getting out and going back to certain normalcy on supply chain and on hospitality. I think we actually back to very level that are very close to pre-COVID. Having said that, what we have seen as an enterprise and from the private sector is obviously we have seen a major resilience from our teams to work throughout those, I'd say that year and a half, where it was obviously we had to adapt and it was quite complicated. And I think as a group and as a team, we are coming out of it stronger, with a lot more resilience, but also a lot more efficiency. And I think we are seeing that as we are really coming out, and probably that this current financial year is really going to give us the full picture of what a normal year post COVID will look like for a group like ours. Having said that, and maybe now focusing a bit more on our venture in East Africa, we opened a business development office there back in 2018, obviously with a view to a bit plant the IBL flag and position ourselves as strategic investors, as we had identified a few key sectors, and I'll talk more to those sectors later, but we had clearly identified a few key sectors that we think were important for us to look at in East Africa. And obviously we have different market entry strategy, one of them being mergers and acquisition. And clearly the uncertainty brought by the COVID crisis and the disruptions accompanying that pandemic, obviously from an investor perspective and from our ability to conclude some deals, did put a bit of a slowdown on that area. What we've seen coming out of that again is obviously the investor appetite. I mean, from our perspective, we clearly believe that the deciding factors for us to be present in East Africa are remaining past that crisis, and they haven't changed. Yes, there are new challenges, but that's always going to be the case, I guess, in business. Mm-hmm. But we clearly think that the remaining factors and why we had decided to invest in East Africa and to invest outside of Mauritius, those factors are clearly there. One thing that crisis has demonstrated is that obviously when you are concentrated on a sole country and in our case on a sole island country, obviously you can see the impact of such pandemic shocks on your economy and obviously on your business. So, if anything, it has, from a strategic perspective, it has reinforced our ambition to be present significantly outside Mauritius. So that's a bit how we are coming out of those let's say challenging years.
More or less, the learnings from that taught you to more or less hedge your bets elsewhere.
I mean, it's confirmed because we as I mentioned, we had opened our office in 2018, which was obviously pre-COVID. So yes, what it did is clearly confirmed that from a strategic perspective, we were right to diversify geographically our investment.
Let's hear from the Mr. Sachin here, and I can imagine you had your hands full in that period, thinking about policies that could help businesses, thinking about how to sustain the economy of the country and all of that. Talk us through how the process that went to in terms of bouncing back for Mauritius.
Yeah. So for Mauritius, our strategy is clear. Mauritius, we have to make the economy a high-income economy. And to make that high-income economy, the strategies have already been laid down by government in its vision, the 2030 vision. It's about opening the economy, bringing in more talents, more people, more know-how, attracting foreign direct investment and investors in the country, try to grow our export, grow our tourism, ensure that we have more and more startups, players, adopt innovation. And all these would help the country upgrade its infrastructure with port, with airport. So that the strategy was defined back in 2016. So the country was moving ahead with a growth rate of 3 to 4%. And came 2020, this is where COVID started. And you imagine with the borders closed, 1.4 million tourists that came in 2019, so suddenly no tourists. The tourism sector was already contributing directly 8.3% to the GDP, indirectly some 25% to the GDP. The financial services, the export sector, so it's a free market economy where we depend a lot on export. So all of these were severely affected, and the impact was a 15% decline in our GDP growth in 2020, and how we had to rebound with a number of policies. Government came up with a company under the Bank of Mauritius. We call it the Mauritius Investment Corporation, the MIC. It's like a sovereign fund where a number of companies were given assistance, wage assistance scheme to ensure that the hotels are able to continue maintaining their people in the payroll. And for the hotels, they were able also to pay back the debt with funds equity participation of the MIC. So a number of measures like that were put into place by government, and also to ensure that we're able to rebound as quickly as possible. And last year, 2022, we had a growth rate of 8.7%, one of the highest growth rates in the world. And this growth has been made possible through different policies. Right strategies to contain COVID with a number of policies, vaccination, which was enrolled, more than 95% of the population was already vaccinated. So we were able to open the country safely. And also for the recovery, with all the measures that government provided to the investors for them to start going back to the markets. For the tourism sector, it has been the same. And this year also, the policies are growing and the economy is back to 2019 level. And we want to innovate further, get new industries to come up. And IT, the digitalization of Mauritius, has been the centerpiece of our recovery strategy, because people were able to connect to the world, to work from home, and to ensure that there is that level of business continuity.
All right, Michelle, because you talked about how your company is diversifying to hedge your bets more or less, ensure that you're not open to some of these shocks that are happening in one country. But I'd like you to speak to the opportunities that you are seeing in this post-pandemic environment right now. We're seeing businesses coming back on board. We're seeing the continent of Africa open up. Quite a lot has been said about integrating the continent. A lot of work being done around payments, making payments accessible across board. We've seen the AFCFTA also come on board in this time as well. And speak to that opportunity that you are seeing across the continent.
Okay. I think, well, first of all, I think such a forum like the Africa CEO is a perfect platform also to showcase, if it had to be, the vibrancy of business leaders around the opportunities in Africa at large. Having said that, and as I mentioned earlier, our focus has been on East Africa. So we've been focusing on some of the opportunities that we see there. Just to take a step back, in terms of our investment philosophy, we call ourselves a strategic investor, which means that we do investment for the long term. We do not have an exit strategy, and we are partnering with firms and we are acquiring stake in firms in East Africa, and we are here to stay. So I think that also gives a perspective in terms of how do we see ourselves and how do we inscribe ourselves in the economic tissue and environment of the region where we think we should be investing. So rebounding out of that crisis, and more to your question, is we have targeted a few 6 sectors, so I'll just quickly name them. So one is retail, one is healthcare distribution, one is FMCG distribution, property, logistic, and renewable energies. What you will see, obviously, and these are sectors where we are already invested in Mauritius and where we have expertise, because clearly our strategy was to see and to match the sectors where we have expertise and the sectors that we feel are fast growing in the region that we want to. What you will also maybe note in those sectors, those sectors have been resilient throughout the crisis. I'll start with logistics as one of our key sectors of focus. It has been challenged clearly, but what we have seen, if we had to learn about that, is that the clear and the key importance of logistics during that crisis. And as we are opening up again, we clearly see that the flows around logistics are starting to go back to the previous level. What we have also seen as well is that we need to rethink some of our supply chain and obviously shorten our supply chain. And these were some of the topics that were clearly identified as part of the forum these couple of days. But on the other industries, healthcare distribution, FMCG distribution, retail distribution, it really addresses some of the needs, basic needs of countries, of population, and of people. So these sectors and these industries have remained very resilient throughout the pandemic, and clearly we felt reassured if I may say so, that we had picked the right industries. I mean, obviously, healthcare in general and the availability of good quality and at available prices healthcare has been and is remaining clearly something that we have seen that the country needs, that the world needs, and positioning ourselves in that space is clearly something that we think is going to a trend that is going to be there and going to be reinforced. Now, speaking more on the retail sector, obviously you are bringing what you are doing basically in the retail sector is you are bringing products and making them available to hopefully a larger number of people, and obviously at affordable prices, quality, affordability, availability, and I think this sector also has proved to be resilient because at the end of the day people would still need to eat and drink and obviously go about their lives. So I think we've tried to really focus on some of the sectors that have resilience throughout these shocks. I'm not saying they're not affected, but they tend to have strong resilience. I was speaking earlier, and Sachin was also alluding to that. A sector like hospitality has seen huge volatility. But again, it's coming out of that crisis quite well, because I think people just want to start traveling again and obviously have some good times. So this is a bit giving you a bit of an essence of why we have kept faith in East Africa as a region. I think the strong demographics that are one of the key drivers and of economic growth over a long-term period. Growing economies. I mean, when we look at East Africa, you've got countries like Kenya with 55 million people, Tanzania probably north of 65, 67 million people, Uganda next door 45 million. If you look at Ethiopia, it's more than 125 million people. So, I mean, you add those numbers and you quickly in a market that has close to 250 million people. So it clearly gives you the size of that market, and obviously some of those sectors are going to be sectors that are going to be there and going to be progressing as the population keeps on growing, as the middle class keeps on getting bigger. So this is a bit those strong demographic and macroeconomic patterns we think are still there. We might be experiencing a few wobbles along the line, but when we project ourselves, and this is why I mentioned that we are strategic investors, when we project ourselves to the medium and long term, we clearly think that those strong fundamentals are going to be there and are going to be drivers of economic growth in that region. So we do feel confident about our long-term strategy there.
All right, talking about strong fundamentals, we've talked about the challenges that have been there before. You also mentioned the reforms that the country has put together now. We're seeing the opportunity that's outside Mauritius in terms of investment, FDI possibly that could come into the country as well. Let's look at where we are right now in terms of that opportunity that's outside Mauritius and how the Economic Development Board is looking at this opportunity and positioning to take advantage.
Okay, just to tell you that the whole strategy, as I said, for Mauritius is centered on business facilitation. How we make it easier for investors to come to Mauritius, to invest and to grow. When they grow, how they can also go and export their products. So when we talk about that entry strategy, it's about how they start a business, how they get the permits and licenses as quickly as possible, how we create more space for them in the country, where they can acquire a property. Once they invest in the country, they get all the incentives needed, electricity, water at the competitive rates. The cost of doing business is something very important for businesses. Then we'll also look at the availability of property, where they can acquire a property. So we don't want to have loose-full investors. So footloose investors, what happens? They come and then they can go. We want investors to come here, grow their activities, employ people. They can also bring people from outside. So what Mauritius has done also has opened up the labor market, where someone can come, have a contract of employment, expatriate or provided with occupation permit, which is a work and live permit, and this permit is for a period of 10 years outright. Permanent residence permit is provided for a period of 20 years. So in terms of business facilitation, also we have looked at taxation to make it simpler, easier for investors. You come, you pay a corporate tax, which is flat, easy. but also a number of incentives. So what we've done post-COVID, 2 schemes were introduced. First, we call it the Premium Investor Certificate. So someone coming to Mauritius investing in few activities and the investment is above 500 Mauritian rupees. So we give a Premium Investor Certificate which provides that investor a package of incentives. So the incentives are customized based on the request of that promoter. So that's the Premium Investor Certificate. And here we want to attract first movers, innovative activities, pharmaceutical companies. And then other investment certificates also are provided with a number of incentives already in law. So Mauritius, what we have tried to do is to use whatever we've put over time, the ecosystem based on the rule of law, democracy, economic stability, political stability, social stability. We've used all our legal framework based on the Mauritian Civil Code, the common law system, and our judiciary to provide comfort to investors. We've used also all the mechanisms that were put into place by different institutions, the Economic Development Board looking at attracting investors, providing the support, the banks, the 19 banks that we have in Mauritius, which are very well regulated, our international financial center to bring those investors to Mauritius. And when they come to Mauritius, it's not about only the small market. You've just mentioned 1.2 million people located in the Indian Ocean. We know the emerging Asia, emerging Africa, Australia on the other hand, and then Europe. We've tried to leverage on all the trade agreements that we have. So Mauritius successfully negotiated agreement with China, the free trade agreement, then the SECPA with India that provide, these 2 agreements provide already a huge market of more than 2.5 billion people. And then the AFCFTA, plus the different agreements that we have with Europe and AGOA. So when investors come, there is a clear value proposition for them when they come to Mauritius. It's not only Mauritius, but to look at the hinterland of Africa and the region and also beyond, where we can export. So another function that we do is also do that level of export promotion of goods and also services in a framework where we can have a diversified economy. Just like Michel mentioned, it's not only agro-industry, but healthcare, innovation, ICT, BPO, education, knowledge, real estate, hospitality, property, tourism. It's also about biotech, pharmaceutical, fintech, financial services. So it's a diversified economy. A new emerging area that we are introducing, the ocean economy, renewable energies, robotics, AI. So all of these are areas where we want to bring in more investors so that we can always be ahead and future ready.
Talking about being future ready, we're here at the Africa CEO Forum here. A lot is being said about how to, help the private sector unlock that next level of growth, growing from about 300 companies that are worth about $1 billion right now to about 3,000, and it's a tall order for the continent to achieve that, and it takes quite concerted efforts from private sector players and the government as well to achieve this. Michel, let's look at this frame up here at the forum here, and for you, in terms of areas of comparative advantage that you're looking at for the continent now, your organization and also continent-wide, where do you think Africa now can unlock that next level of growth?
Various sectors, and I think we've had quite a few topics and quite a few conversations during that forum, and some of them are still obviously ongoing to really try and showcase those areas of growth. I mean, we always hear about the fact that Africa is the last frontier, and everyone wants to be present in Africa. I think obviously it does take what we should obviously have in mind is these things do take time, and we have seen, because it's not recently, it's not our first ventures in Africa, and what we have seen is obviously the need to be resilient and the need to have patience, and I would say also the need to find the right partners. Now, in terms of how does the continent at large unlocks value, I think we would not do, and again that's my opinion, we would not do justice to Africa if we consider it as just one destination. I think it's 54 countries. Mauritius is one of those countries. It's 54 countries, and probably you would need to have different strategies and you would have potential and value growth areas in each of these countries, which would be different from one another. What I think a forum like this does is obviously bring around the same table, bring in the same place the investors that are looking at Africa as an opportunity market. But not only that, but it connects also the operators in those countries, the one that have the local knowledge, that understand the way that the African economies and the country in Africa, how they work, and what are the key success factors to be able to establish yourself in the long term. So I don't think we should be too general here in terms of highlighting what are the next, the key areas of growth as a continent. I think we should try and be more specific from an IBL perspective, and what we've obviously tried to do is really understand in the region where we wanted to focus, which again is East Africa, what are some of the sectors there that are fast growing, what are some of the sectors where we think we can bring expertise, and what are some of the sectors that are looking at having foreign investors coming in. So these three things put together are guiding us, I would say, in our strategy, in our investment, in our joint ventures, and in our partnerships. So clearly, for me, it has to be more specific. It has to be country-driven. I think in terms of creating the right forums from a continent perspective, these are some of the nice things to do. Trying to understand how there's two levels of market that we need to make sure that we dive into, and I think it is Africa as a market and Africa as an exporter. So I think we've got two levels here, and I think there are opportunities to be tapped in both of those markets as the country, as the continent, and some of the leading economic countries get the right level of infrastructure to be able to, first of all, access, better connect the African market within itself as a continent, the African countries between themselves, but also as we develop logistic and supply chains to be able to export, obviously. And I was at an interesting talk earlier, actually yesterday, on agriculture and food sustainability and supply chain, and it was quite an interesting panel. Obviously, and just on that topic itself, obviously there are significant opportunities to grow the output of the African continent and some of the African countries in terms of agriculture, and then how do we make sure that we first of all connect these producing countries between themselves to alleviate some of the hunger issues that we do have in some other countries and clearly on the continent. I think Africa, unfortunately, in terms of percentage of people suffering hunger compared to some of the other continents, we are at the highest percentage. So clearly there is a challenge that we need to address, looking at ourselves internally. But then also, clearly then there is the opportunity to become a larger player, I would say, in that sector, by increasing our yields, increasing our land under cultivation, and obviously increasing our connections with the markets, the global markets of the world. So this is a thing. This is a bit, in a nutshell, what I see coming out of this forum. We need to think globally, but we need to be specific, country specific in our tactical and strategic moves.
All right, guys. It says think globally, but be specific in our moves here. And you shared your opinion as well, and also let me get the thoughts about the board in terms of how you're looking at the continent right now and that opportunity to unlock that next level of growth that we need to drive the development that we so desire on the continent.
So Africa is where the next level of growth would be. The opportunities would be coming from Africa, be it in terms of the population growth that would be coming up, the demand for consumer goods that will be coming, the investment in infrastructure, in real estate, in renewable energy, in manufacturing, in all areas. So that's something very important. And then when we talk about food security, when we talk about production, to have the production house in Africa. So there are opportunities to bring those multinationals, those big corporations in Africa. And where we want to position Mauritius is to attract from the Economic Development Board, not only to market Mauritius, but to market the region and also to market Africa. That Africa is a place with tremendous opportunities for investors. When investors come, they would be coming for the resources, but also for the market, but also produce to export to the global market. So all these would happen only through investment and through investors. So FDI for us is strategic, and FDI are the source for the future growth, to create opportunities, to create jobs, but also to create that better quality of life. Now, what we are doing is to tell companies to come to use the Mauritian jurisdiction. It's a province jurisdiction where they can come in Mauritius, set up their regional headquarters, and then invest in Africa. They can have their funds in Mauritius and then channel through Mauritius to Africa. We can provide information, we can provide that level of security, we can also provide protection through the different IPPAs, investment promotion and protection agreements, when they go into Africa. So this is a way we want to market the region, to market the whole of Africa, so that we can grow together with all African nations. This is our strategy for the region.
But Michel, when you listen to that strategy, as someone in the private sector, how would you like to see reforms play out that will favor the work that you're doing on the continent and also help you unlock your next level of growth on the continent?
Yeah, thanks. So, few suggestions for Sachin. No, I think Mauritius has been doing very well in position. I mean, obviously, I won't talk into what Sachin has already mentioned, but one thing that I've seen clearly at this forum, but I obviously had a strong sense of what is that Mauritius is a very attractive destination for people to set up their headquarters in view to invest in Africa. And I think the country over the years has done tremendous work to establish the right to be part of some of the right commercial agreements that are governing the African countries, but also set up a quite strong non-double taxation agreement, which obviously makes Mauritius attractive as a destination to invest in Africa. And I think for us, being a Mauritian company and investing in Africa, obviously we do piggyback on the good work that has been done up to now. And obviously what we will obviously want to see is our government to try and secure more of those agreements, and obviously promote Mauritius as an investment destination, keep on promoting, because it's already being done, and I hope that this current panel is going to help also towards that. But it clearly reinforcing those links and making sure that investors based in Mauritius or people investing from Mauritius into Africa get the right conditions and the right agreement to encourage this investment. So I think these are some of the key measures that could be obviously further developed. And as I mentioned, it's already, I think, over the past years, our country has done a tremendous work into setting the right frameworks to allow that. And I think one of the opportunities, and we may not always be looking into that, and I'm talking here about us, IBL being a Mauritian group, is that we are not discovering, but we are clearly understanding the power of Mauritius as an investment hub to invest in Africa. And there probably are quite a few partnerships, quite a few people that we would want to partner with and invest with on the continent that have actually headquarters in Mauritius, that are using Mauritius as an investment hub to Africa. And I think there probably lacks today a clear understanding of really who are these people that are using Mauritius as an investment hub, and how can we, a Mauritian, let's say, I mean, these companies are also Mauritian, but how can we as a traditional Mauritian company get those partners which are actually next to us in Mauritius, and see how do we invest on the continent together and make sure that we have meaningful and sustainable impact in the region and in the industries where we invest in.
All right, because it brings me to the next conversation, because if we're going to unlock that next level of growth, clearly it's not only Africans are seeing the opportunity in Africa. Investors all over the world want to tap into the continent. They want to also make profit from the opportunities that are in the continent. And it talks about being staying competitive in that space. I'd like you to speak to the experience of Mauritius and also that removal from the FATF blacklist and what this would mean in terms of being more competitive in the global space.
So the Mauritius International Financial Center is here for the last 30 years. So we have had that experience of putting all the structures, the legal system, the regulatory framework, the Financial Services Commission, the different institutions. And also in terms of compliance to international standards, we have always ensured that we have the proper legal framework, be it in terms of AML, CFT, anti-money laundering. And in 2020, this is where Mauritius was assessed by FATF, and we were in that list. And then Mauritius started with an aggressive program to upgrade, to look at all the deficiencies and address all those. So what Mauritius did to set up committees from the highest level, the Prime Minister of Mauritius was chairing those committees to ensure that we address all those deficiencies. And today, Mauritius is fully compliant in all of the 40 deficiencies and all the 40 recommendations that were made. And since October 2021, Mauritius is in the white list. So all these have helped Mauritius to maintain that reputation of having an international financial center of repute, fully compliant with international standards and norms. But also, it's not only that, but also trying to be ahead of the curve, come up with new products like the Vitus for the Virtual Asset and Initial Token Offering Act, where it was passed through the National Assembly, just to ensure that we have the proper legal framework. We have the Variable Capital Company, the VCC, and the VCC Act was passed into the National Assembly just to ensure that, again, we have those products to be able to have and bring the new players in fintech, for instance. Again, in the financial services sector, we want to bring those global players. So, in a nutshell, just to tell you that throughout the history, it has always been to ensure that we have the proper legal framework, we have the regulatory institutions like the Financial Services Commission, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and we collaborate with all major international institutions to ensure that we have the level of collaboration, and also we can share the best practices with our friendly nations on how Mauritius has been doing for the progress of the region.
Yeah, would you say these steps are adequate enough to forestall a possible re-inclusion into this list in the near future? If so, what else are you doing in terms of putting that into cognizance to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
So it's about continuous improvement. It's about ensuring that we fully comply with all the recommendations of FATF, and also come up with new legislation, just like I mentioned. But the job never ends. It's about always coming up with new amendments to laws, trying to reinforce whenever we see that there could be potential areas of deficiencies, and trying to see what other countries are also doing in terms of best practices. So to stay ahead of the curve is always to work with the private sector, and that has been one of the cornerstones of the success of Mauritius, where whenever we have an issue, it's always to work together with the private sector, the public sector, the institutions, international organizations to come up with and propose solutions. The private sector, public sector working hand in hand I think this is the key ingredient to ensure that we again don't go into that list.
Yeah, because you prompted my next conversation, because it's getting the government and the private sector to work hand in hand, but it starts with a shared vision. And I'd like to know how you're including the private sector in terms of reforms and planning and all that. And also, Michelle, you can also respond as well, how you like to see that play out.
Yeah.
Let me start with him, yeah.
Yeah. The way we are structured in Mauritius, okay, we have government. Yeah? Government is about coming up with new policies, looking at the economic strategy, ensuring that we create more circle of opportunities for the people. But everything, it's centered around human, because everything you do is for the people. So this is the first strategy, government looking at the better and for the good of everyone. Second, the different structures have been put into place where the private sector has to communicate, and they can communicate to governments through different structures. There are public-private joint committees that very often, actually every 3 months, meet to ensure that there is a level of dialogue, sharing of information, then what are the opportunities that they can come up with, and also advise or advocate for areas where there could be new opportunities or new areas or new amendments to be brought to legislation to make the country competitive. And then also we have the Economic Development Board, where we interact on a daily basis with the private sector, where we gather information, we do survey, get the sentiment of the market, so that we can again come up with policy advocacy and proposal for policy changes. And then we have the global community. The global community, they always come up with new ideas, with best practices, what's happening elsewhere in other competitive jurisdictions like Singapore, Dubai, India, Europe, in America. We scan the market, get all the information, and then again we try to ensure that we are able to come up with policies just to ensure that we maintain our competitive edge and the competitive advantage to be able to navigate through all the different areas that have been identified as engine of growth.
Let me get Michelle to respond to that as well and talk about areas you would love to see more collaboration play out.
I think from a Mauritian perspective, I think Sachin covered it quite well. So I'll maybe take the question from the lens of our presence in East Africa. I think, and I'm going to depart a little bit, obviously some of those instances and those forums that Sachin has identified are also present in most of the countries in East Africa. But I also think that as we position ourselves in East Africa, and as we become a sizable player in that market, it is important for us also to create our own links and our own conversation to be able to talk about what we think are key agendas that are going to, first of all, help us grow as players in the industry of those countries in East Africa, but also help the country at large to attract the right level, the right kind of investors, the right kind of people to help grow the industry and grow the economy at large. Having said that, I think one of the things we should not forget or set aside here is really over and above the fact that we want to engage with the government to foster a better investment environment. I think we also need to look at our first of all at our impact in the industries, in the companies where we are positioning ourselves as investors, and we need to make sure that we do good there. And one of the key learnings that we have seen, and I wanted to share that, is I think what we've tried to do is really to come into those markets, in the East African market, with a lot of humility, and really to make sure that we strike the right partnership with the right people. Our philosophy of investment has always been to keep the founding families, the founding partners of the business we are investing in alongside us. And we really value the strength of those partnerships. Then again, it is really to invest in companies that will do good and that will impact the various stakeholders that they have in a positive way, and that will further economic growth, but also social inclusiveness, and we will add to that the sustainability and the environmental aspect to those things. And I think if you manage to, at your level, and which is what we've been doing at your level, to get those things right, come in with the right level of humility, get the right partners, then obviously it gives you more credibility, and it allows you to re-engage serenely, I would say, with the authorities, and have a strong voice to influence for the better the policies of the different governments in the countries where we would like to establish a long-term presence.
Yeah, because Bishop mentioned a very important point. They're talking about valuing the strength of partnerships in there. And earlier on, you mentioned you're working to in some emerging industries. You're working. You mentioned robotics. You mentioned AI. You mentioned some areas where you're looking at technology. And I'm trying to imagine how you're looking at partnerships in that regard, especially with the private sector.
Yeah. So the success of Mauritius has always been trying to innovate, to come up with new areas, be it in the agro industry. So our strategy today is to consolidate the existing one. So agro industry, the tourism sector, about the financial services sector, the manufacturing, the construction, and then how we can accelerate the existing one. Here I'm talking about the ICT sector, how we can accelerate it better, the healthcare, education, and then the new areas, and this is where we need to have foreign investors, where we need to have talent, where we need to have that transfer of knowledge. If again you go back and see the history of Mauritius, always it has been to bring those foreign investors. And it is those foreign investors that have enabled that transfer of knowledge, be it in the tourism sector, where the South African came to Mauritius, they show how to construct and set up a hotel and manage a hotel business. And then this knowledge was passed on to the major groups. And today, when you see the major groups in Mauritius, the Beachcomber, for the IBL group, Lux, then you have Attitude Resort, the different local companies today are managing a chain of hotels, and they're also investing abroad. They have had outward investment in Maldives, in Seychelles, also in Africa. Again, when you look at the manufacturing sector, it was investors from Hong Kong who came and imparted that knowledge to the local players like Ciel and others. And then they started manufacturing and create that robust manufacturing sector, textile sector. It has happened in the ICT sector, where those global companies from India, from Europe came, and then we have had local software developers company, BPO companies. So we want the same to happen in AI, in robotics, in biotechnology, in pharmaceuticals, where they can come, import that knowledge, and then we learn from that. I think this should be, it's a successful model, it has worked, and we need to ensure that the same models is adopted. But for that to happen, we need to build that ecosystem, and that ecosystem is to have a good education system, is to ensure that we have an open market economy, to ensure that when foreign investors come, we have free flow of capital. There is no restriction to set up a company. There is no need to have a local partner, because otherwise those investors won't be comfortable. You need to have good intellectual property laws, but also to ensure that whenever they are making profit, they can take back the profit. There is no restriction on the repatriation of funds, to ensure that you are a low tax jurisdiction, so that you can be competitive enough with all what's required. And the doing business environment is key to ensure that you're able to bring those innovative sectors and create that, I would say, ecosystem for startups to grow and entrepreneurs to invest, so that you can always have budding entrepreneurs in new areas.
Very forward thinking, and I really like that approach to things. As we wrap up now, just need to get your final words, but as you say your final words, speak to the long-term play, especially for the IBL group in Mauritius and outside.
I think for us, clearly, we've embarked on a strategy where we want to pivot our group revenue streams to have a significant portion of our revenue stream and our group profitability coming outside of Mauritius. And clearly, East Africa has been identified as the area of focus for the group. And I think if we are successful in our strategy, we would probably see close to, I would say, I hope in the future, close to 30% and above of our revenues that will maybe come from outside Mauritius, and hopefully a large chunk of that will be from East Africa. But I think as concluding remarks, I'd like to borrow a little quote from a song that was going around back in 2010 when Africa and South Africa actually hosted the first Football World Cup on the continent. I think more than ever, it's time for Africa.
It's time for Africa. Let's hear your thoughts as well, and also the long-term play for Mauritius on the continent.
So for Mauritius, it's about how we can use Mauritius as a test bed for Africa, how we can use all the best practices and ensure that we can export those best practices. And third, about, again, our strategy has been to become that high-level economy. And for that to happen, what we want is to ensure that we have a competitive economy where we are able to attract more talents, people with best-in-class infrastructure. Second, it's about how we can improve the quality of life of the people in the country with the development of different smart cities that are being developed in Mauritius. And all those are based, third, on the sustainability concept, where again we put the human at the center of all development. We take into consideration the environment, social and governance, the ESG principle, to ensure that whatever is being done in such a way that we don't jeopardize the future. So I think building that green economy, circular economy, and whatever we are doing to protect the island, be it in terms of renewable energy, in terms of green buildings, green infrastructure, green financing, we can use all those to Africa. So that's how we see Mauritius, a small island, but a test bed for the continent.
All right, thank you so much for your time today, gentlemen. I've been speaking to Mr. Sachin Mohabir. He's the Acting Deputy Chief Executive Officer for the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. He says they are putting the humans at the center of their development objectives. My other guest as well, Michel Pelot, is the Chief Operating Officer for the IBL East Africa Investment Group, and he says that it's time for Africa. And I share that thought very much. And thank you so much for watching this panel today from the sidelines of the Africa CEO Forum in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. I'm Kenneth Bomo. Thank you for your time.